This app erases mistakes and reality. The app had a simple premise: erase your embarrassing moments. Megan had stumbled across it in a late-night internet rabbit hole. It was called Redo, and its description was almost too good to be true. Regret that awkward comment? Wish you could undo that stumble in front of your crush? Use Redo to rewind 10 minutes of your life. No consequences, no strings attached. At first she laughed it off. It was a gimmick, right? But curiosity got the better of her. Megan downloaded it, and within minutes she found herself staring at its single, glowing button: undo. The first time she used it, it was harmless. She'd spilled coffee on her white shirt before work and groaned in frustration. On a whim, she opened the app and hit the button. The world flickered for a split second. Megan blinked, and suddenly she was standing in her kitchen again, her shirt spotless, holding the coffee cup before the spill. Her heart raced. It worked. Over the next few weeks, Megan used the app for small, everyday inconveniences. Forgetting her umbrella before a rainstorm. Blurting out something awkward during a team meeting. Tripping over a curb on her evening jog. Every time, the app rewound her 10 minutes and she fixed her mistake. She started feeling invincible, like life's little stumbles couldn't touch her. But then she noticed him. The first time she saw him was in the park. She'd used Redo to undo a spilled drink, and as the world flickered back to its earlier state, he was there, standing in the background, watching her. Tall, pale, and dressed in a black coat that didn't match the sunny weather. Megan brushed it off as a coincidence. But then she saw him again a few days later. She was at the grocery store, rewinding to grab a forgotten item before checkout. As the scene reset, he was there, leaning casually against a shelf of canned beans, staring at her. She froze. The man didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched. The third time was at her office. Megan had used Redo to reword a poorly phrased email to her boss. When the timeline rewound, she glanced out the window, and there he was, standing across the street, staring up at her. Her hands trembled as she closed her laptop. This wasn't normal. Megan tried to tell herself it was nothing. Maybe she was imagining things. But deep down, she knew it wasn't her imagination. Every time she rewound the clock, the stranger appeared. Always silent. Always watching. One night, unable to sleep, Megan decided to test it. She sat in her living room, phone in hand, staring at the glowing undo button. Her finger hovered over it. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's see if you're real." She pressed the button. The world flickered. The clock on her wall rewound 10 minutes. The TV show she'd been watching jumped back to the earlier scene. And there he was, sitting on the other end of the couch. Megan screamed, scrambling backward. The man didn't flinch. He just sat there, hands folded neatly in his lap, his pale face calm and expressionless. What do you want?" she stammered. "You used it again," he said, his voice deep and even. "What does that mean? Who are you?" The man tilted his head. "You've rewound the clock 19 times. That's 19 moments you've erased, 19 threads you've cut from the fabric of time. So what?" Megan snapped, fear twisting into anger. "It's 10 minutes. It doesn't matter." "It does," he said, leaning forward. His eyes locked onto hers, cold and piercing. "You can't take pieces of time without paying the cost. Every time you rewind, you create a void. I fill that void." Megan shook her head. "That's insane. You're lying." The man smiled faintly. "Am I? Tell me this. How many times have you rewound, and yet you still can't seem to avoid me? I'm already a part of your timeline, Megan. I grow closer with every use." Her stomach turned. "What happens when you're too close?" He didn't answer. He stood slowly, his tall frame looming over her. "I suggest you stop using it, Megan. But if you don't," he paused, his smile widening ever so slightly, "I'll see you soon." And then just like that, he was gone. Megan deleted the app that night. For weeks, she resisted the urge to reinstall it. Life's little mistakes returned. She spilled drinks, made awkward comments, and forgot her umbrella. It was frustrating, but at least the stranger stopped appearing. Until one day when she received a notification on her phone. "Welcome back, Megan. You have 19 credits remaining." Her blood ran cold. The app wasn't there anymore. She deleted it. And yet the message remained. From the corner of her eye, she thought she saw someone standing just outside her window. But when she turned, there was nothing there. For now. Meeting the stranger. Megan hadn't slept in days. The notification, "Welcome back, Megan. You have 19 credits remaining," had been the beginning of her unraveling. She deleted the app, but it didn't seem to matter. The words lingered on her phone like a curse. And then there was the stranger. The memory of his pale, unflinching face haunted her. He hadn't appeared since she'd stopped using the app, but the fear of seeing him again had become her shadow. Every flicker of motion in her peripheral vision sent her heart racing. One evening, the notification changed. "Time remaining, unstable. Seek guidance." Megan's stomach clenched. She tossed her phone on the table and paced the living room. She'd ignored the first notification, hoping it would disappear, but this felt different. It wasn't a warning. It was an instruction. "Guidance," she muttered aloud. "From who?" The answer came quickly. A knock at the door. Megan froze. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and something about the knock felt off. Too steady, too deliberate. She opened the door slowly, bracing herself. The stranger stood on her porch, his black coat blending into the night. He looked the same as before, tall, pale, calm. "You," she said, her voice trembling. "Me," he replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Megan backed away. "What do you want?" "I deleted the app. I stopped using it." "Why are you still here?" The stranger tilted his head, his cold eyes scanning her. "Deleted? No, Megan. The app isn't gone. It's integrated now, woven into your timeline. Deleting it only removes your illusion of control." "What does that mean?" she demanded. "It means," he said, "your reality is no longer what you think it is." The truth about the stranger. The stranger gestured to the couch. "Sit. We need to talk." Megan didn't move. "I'll stand." He sighed. "As you wish. Let me explain." He began pacing, his footsteps unervingly silent. "Every time you used redo, you rewrote your timeline. But time is not a blank slate. It's a thread, interconnected, interdependent. When you erase 10 minutes, you don't delete them. You displace them. Those moments don't vanish. They have to go somewhere." "Where?" Megan asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The stranger stopped and turned to her. "Here." She blinked. "What do you mean here?" "This timeline," he said, gesturing around the room, "isn't your original one. You erased it. Every time you rewound, you stitched together pieces of other timelines. Fractured moments, fragmented realities. What you call your life is now a patchwork of stolen time." Megan felt her knees weaken. "You're lying. That's not possible." "It's very possible," he said. "I should know. I'm from one of those discarded timelines. You erased me, Megan. And now I'm here." Her breath caught. "Erased you? How?" "You used redo in a moment that intersected with my timeline. When you rewound, you unraveled everything everything I knew. My world collapsed." He stepped closer, his presence towering. "I survived by clinging to the void you left behind. That's why I'm here. I'm not just watching. I'm part of your timeline now. The cracks in reality." Megan shook her head, backing away. "No. This is insane. If you're real, then why didn't you stop me before? Why didn't you warn me?" "I tried," he said, his voice low and calm. "You didn't listen. You dismissed me as a trick of the light, a coincidence, a figment of your imagination. Humans are good at ignoring what they don't want to see." Megan's mind raced. "So what happens now? Is this it? Are you just going to follow me around forever?" The stranger's expression darkened. "No. This reality won't hold much longer. The patchwork is unraveling. Cracks are already forming. You've seen them, haven't you? Things out of place. People acting strangely. Events repeating." She thought of the grocery store cashier who had greeted her twice in the same conversation, or the clock in her kitchen that had rewound itself without her touching it. "If the timeline collapses," the stranger continued, "everything ends. You, me, everyone in this stolen reality. Then how do I fix it?" she asked, desperation creeping into her voice. He hesitated. "You can't. Not completely. But you can try to stabilize it. The impossible choice." The stranger held out his hand. "The app is still active. You have 19 credits left. Use them to retrace your steps. Go back to each moment you rewound and restore the original outcome. Undo the rewinds." Megan's heart sank. "But that means I'll have to live through all of those mistakes again." "Yes," he said. "And some will be worse than you remember. Painful. Messy. But it's the only way to repair what you've broken. What if I don't? The stranger's gaze turned cold. Then this reality collapses and you collapse with it. No rewinds. No second chances. Just nothing. Megan stared at him, her thoughts spinning. The idea of reliving her worst moments, those awkward, painful, humiliating memories she tried so hard to erase, filled her with dread. But the alternative was even worse. What happens to you? She asked quietly. The stranger's expression softened for the first time. If you fix the timeline, I'll cease to exist. I'll return to the void where you left me. Megan swallowed hard. And if I fail? Then we both disappear, he said simply. And everything else with us. The first undo. Megan stared at her phone, the redo button glowing faintly on the screen as if mocking her. The stranger stood silently nearby, his presence heavy but patient. She pressed the button. The world flickered. She was back in her kitchen, standing over a spilled coffee mug. The stains spread across her white shirt, just as it had weeks ago. Megan felt the familiar rush of frustration, but this time she let it happen. As she looked up, she saw the stranger standing in the corner of the room, watching her. One down, he said. 18 to go. The cracks in her reality might heal, but the journey had only just begun. The stranger's true nature. The notification was gone. The app was gone. But Megan's sense of dread remained. For weeks she had been undoing her rewinds, one mistake at a time. The spilled coffee, the forgotten umbrella, the awkward conversations, all of them replayed exactly as they had been, with Megan forcing herself to endure them without intervention. At first, the changes were subtle. The flickering lights stopped. The strange loops in conversations disappeared. The world felt steady again. But something else was changing too. The stranger, once cold and distant, seemed different now. He no longer loomed in the shadows, silently watching. He spoke more often, his voice no longer monotone but tinged with emotion. He seemed curious, asking Megan questions about her life, her choices, her regrets. And then one day he surprised her. You're almost done, he said as they sat in her living room. Good, Megan said sharply. Then you'll be gone. The stranger tilted his head, a flicker of something, sadness, crossing his face. Do you want me to be gone? She froze. The question felt heavier than it should have. Yes, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Cracks in the armor. The next rewind took her back to her office, to the poorly phrased email she had sent her boss. She remembered the frustration, the embarrassment, the way she had rewritten it to sound more polished. Now she let herself hit send without correcting it. When the rewind ended, she found herself back in her apartment, the stranger standing by the window. He was staring out at the street, his hands clasped behind his back. Does it bother you? He asked without turning around. What? The mistakes. Living with them instead of erasing them. Megan hesitated. It's harder. But it feels right, I guess. Like I'm learning something. The stranger nodded. That's the difference between us. What do you mean? He turned to face her, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. You're learning. You're growing. I can't. Her brow furrowed. What are you talking about? She stopped herself, unsure how to finish the sentence. Human. Life. Ew. I wasn't always like this, he said, stepping closer. When you first saw me, I was nothing more than a shadow. A fragment of something erased. But every time you rewound, you gave me more. Your emotions. Your regrets. Your fears. I'm not just a stranger, Megan. I'm you. The truth about the stranger. Megan's breath caught in her throat. What are you talking about? I'm not from another timeline, he said. I'm a manifestation of everything you tried to erase. Every mistake you couldn't live with, every moment you rewound to forget. I'm all of it. The app didn't just create me, it pulled me out of you. Megan shook her head. No. That doesn't make sense. You're not me. You're everything you've avoided, he said, cutting her off. The anger you suppress. The guilt you bury. The fear you refuse to face. That's why I've been here watching you. That's why I've grown more human. The closer you get to accepting your mistakes, the closer I get to becoming whole. Megan stumbled back, her head spinning. Then what happens when I finish? When I undo the last rewind? The stranger smiled faintly, but there was no joy in it. Then I go back to where I came from. Back to you. The final rewind. The final rewind was the hardest. It wasn't a spilled coffee or a clumsy stumble, it was a fight. She and her best friend Rachel had argued months ago. Megan couldn't even remember how it started, but she remembered how it ended, with Rachel storming out and Megan in a fit of anger rewinding the moment so it never happened. They hadn't spoken since. As the world flickered, Megan found herself in her kitchen, Rachel standing in front of her, tears in her eyes. "Why can't you just admit you're wrong for once?" Rachel snapped. Megan's first instinct was to rewind again, to take back the pain and frustration. But she forced herself to stop, to breathe. "You're right," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry." Rachel froze, caught off guard. The tension in the room hung heavy for a moment before she sighed and shook her head. "I just want you to be honest with me. That's all." "I will be," Megan said. "I promise." Acceptance. When the rewind ended, Megan was alone in her apartment. The stranger stood in the center of the room, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "It's done," she said. "Yes," he replied. "So, now what?" He stepped closer, his form flickering slightly. "Now you move forward. And he hesitated, his voice softening. "I become part of you again. Where I've always belonged." Megan's throat tightened. "Will I remember you?" "Not as you see me now," he said. "But I'll still be here. In the mistakes you've accepted. In the strength you've gained. I'm not leaving you, Megan. I'm just changing." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you." The stranger smiled, a real, genuine smile for the first time. Then slowly he began to fade, his edges dissolving like smoke in the air. As he disappeared, Megan felt a strange sense of peace. The room was quiet, the air still. For the first time in months she felt whole. Epilogue. Weeks passed. Megan's life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be. She still made mistakes, still stumbled through awkward moments and minor disasters. But she faced them head-on, no longer tempted to undo them. One evening as she sat on her couch, her phone buzzed with a notification. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked it up, half expecting to see redo. Instead it was a message from Rachel. "Dinner tomorrow? My treat." Megan smiled. She put the phone down and leaned back, watching the world outside her window. For the first time she wasn't afraid of moving forward.